Fear slithered through the dust-choked streets like a rattlesnake seeking shade before the strike. They bound her wrists with rawhide that bit into skin still scarred from a fever's fire. The iron glowed a malevolent orange in the blacksmith's forge, ready to brand a witch. She had survived the sweating sickness that took a dozen souls, and survival meant sorcery here. Elias rode into the square just as the crowd's murmur rose to a fever pitch of hate. He saw the woman, her spine straight, eyes dry, refusing to grant them her terrified screams. His own wife had perished in that same outbreak, leaving him a hollow shell on a ranch. But grief had not curdled into cruelty within him. It had carved a cavern of silent empathy. He pushed through the throng with his horse, the big bay gelding shouldering aside frightened men. The preacher held the iron aloft, declaring the devil's bride must be marked for salvation. Elias's voice cut through the chanting, low and steady as a blade drawn from its sheath. He announced that the first person to touch that iron to her skin would answer to him. His hand rested on his colt, not in threat, but in a promise that stilled the mob. The preacher hesitated, and in that pause, the woman's gaze locked onto Elias's storm-gray eyes. He saw not a witch, but a survivor whose hands trembled with the effort of staying upright. He dismounted, walked to the post, and sliced the rawhide bonds with a single smooth motion. The crowd snarled but parted, because Elias Tanner was a man whose reputation was built on quiet steel. He lifted her onto his horse and rode out of town without a backward glance at the fuming righteous. Her name was Ilara, and she hadn't spoken a single word since the fever took her voice. The sickness had scarred her throat and palms, leaving her with a permanent whisper and gentleness. He brought her to his isolated ranch, a place where the wind could wash away the smell of fear. That first night, she collapsed into a fever dream, her body reliving the epidemic's horror. Elias bathed her forehead with cool well water, his rough hands surprisingly tender against her skin. He noticed the intricate scars on her palms, swirling patterns that looked like tiny healed lightning strikes. When she woke, she saw the raw, festering rope burn encircling his wrist from a calf roping accident. She reached out with her scarred palm and hovered it over his wound, her eyes asking silent permission. He nodded, curious and desperate, and she pressed her hand gently onto the hot, swollen flesh. A strange warmth flowed, not like fire, but like the first sun after a long, frozen winter. The pain receded instantly, and the angry redness began to fade beneath her steady, inexplicable touch. Elias stared, his rational mind warring with the undeniable evidence of his own healing skin. That was the moment he understood the town's fear was a mask for their profound, jealous ignorance. He asked her no questions, simply offered her food and a bed in the spare room. Days turned into weeks, and she began to communicate with gestures and written notes on a slate. She revealed her grandmother had taught her the old healing ways, a mix of herbs and energy. Her scarred palms were conduits, a gift that had saved her from the fever's final, fatal stage. She never called it magic, only a deep understanding of the body's own desperate desire to mend. Elias found himself looking forward to her shy smile, the way she arranged dried yarrow in jars. The ranch, once a mausoleum of his grief, began to smell of lavender tinctures and fresh bread. He taught her to ride gently, and she taught him to listen to the silent language of wounds. A fragile, unspoken connection grew between them, as natural and unstoppable as the prairie grass. They laughed one evening when a clumsy hand knocked over a tincture, staining the floor a vivid blue. He caught her hand to steady her, and the jolt was not healing but something entirely different. Neither pulled away, and the air became thick with the scent of crushed herbs and unspoken longing. Then, a frantic knocking shattered their peace on a moonless, howling night in early autumn. A farmer from town stood on the porch, his face ashen, his son cradled in his arms. The boy's leg was crushed, a wagon wheel accident, and the doctor had given him up for lost. Blood soaked through the bandages, and the child's breaths were shallow, fluttering things about to cease. The farmer, who had held a stone to throw at Elias, now fell to his knees begging. She didn't hesitate. Her scarred hands moved to the mangled limb, hovering, then pressing with deliberate care. Elias watched the miracle unfold as the bleeding slowed, then stopped, and the bone shifted under her palms. The boy's color returned, his screams quieting to exhausted whimpers, and the farmer wept with ragged gratitude. Word spread like wildfire through tinder-dry fear. The witch had healed a boy the doctor couldn't save. But before the town could process this grace, a new terror descended, a swift, merciless plague. It started with a high fever and black blisters, killing within 3 days, defying all medical knowledge. The doctor fled, and the preacher declared it God's punishment for letting the witch live. Families barricaded themselves inside, but the sickness seeped through the cracks like an invisible, vengeful fog. Elias stood on his porch and watched the distant smoke of too many funeral pyres on the horizon. He knew Elias was the only answer, but he also knew the town's capacity for savage denial. She touched his arm and wrote on her slate, "They will kill me before I can help." He pulled her close, his voice a fierce vow against her hair, promising no iron would touch her again. They rode into town together, a cowboy and a branded witch, into a maelstrom of desperate, dying fear. The preacher screamed for her arrest, but a mother with a blistering child blocked his path with a rifle. She said the witch was the only one who could save her daughter, and she'd shoot any man who interfered. The shift in the mob was palpable. Survival's instinct began to strangle the old, bitter superstition. Elias spoke, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had lost everything and found redemption in scarred palms. He challenged them to look at the healed boy, the sealed rope burn, and deny the evidence. Elias stepped forward, her silent presence a stark contrast to the preacher's frothing, fearful rhetoric. She knelt beside the child and placed her hands on the blistered skin, eyes closing in concentration. The black blisters began to recede, the fever broke, and the child's labored breathing eased into soft, peaceful sleep. One by one, they brought their sick to her, laying them at the feet of the condemned healer. She worked for 3 days without rest, her scarred palms glowing faintly, her body withering with each healing. Elias forced water and broth between her lips, holding her upright when her own strength faltered. The plague retreated, not vanquished but broken, like a wave crashing against an immovable cliff of compassion. When the last patient was saved, Elias collapsed, and Elias caught her before she hit the ground. He carried her to the church, the same church where she was to be branded, and laid her on the altar. The preacher, shamed and silent, handed him a blanket, his theology in ruins at his feet. The town held its breath through the night, a vigil of lanterns and whispered prayers for the witch. She opened her eyes at dawn, her first word a croaked, weary whisper, "Elias." He wept openly, unashamed, his tears falling onto her scarred hands like a baptism of a new faith. The town council met that day and burned the branding iron in the public square as a symbol of their folly. They offered Elias a permanent home and a clinic, but she looked only to Elias for her answer. She wrote on her slate that she would stay if he would be by her side. He knelt before the entire town, taking her scarred hands, and asked her to be his wife. She laughed, a sound like water over ancient stones, and nodded, her voice still a fragile whisper. Their wedding was held on the prairie, with wildflowers braided into the mane of Elias's bay gelding. The boy whose leg she mended served as ring-bearer, limping only slightly, his grin wide. The mother who had threatened the preacher with a rifle read a passage about love casting out all fear. Elias wore a dress of pale blue, and her scarred palms were adorned with henna patterns of healing herbs. Elias's vows were simple. He promised to be the shield she never again would need. She whispered her vows back, each word a triumph over the scar tissue in her throat. They built the clinic together on the edge of his ranch, a sanctuary of whitewashed boards and kindness. She taught other women the old ways, and they formed a network of healers across the frontier. Elias managed the ranch, and at night, he'd find her in the garden, tending her medicinal plants. He'd wrap his arms around her waist and marvel at the hands that had rebuilt his entire world. She'd lean back into him and trace the long-gone rope burn on his wrist, a silent memory. Their love was not a frantic blaze, but a deep, enduring hearth fire that warmed the entire valley. The town that once called her a witch now called her the angel of the prairie. They sent her gifts of honey, woven blankets, and handwritten letters of apology she never required. She accepted only their changed hearts, which she considered the most valuable medicine of all. When a traveling circuit judge arrived, he officially expunged any record of the branding event. Elias asked what she wanted most in the world, and she wrote, "A child with your eyes." A year later, she gave birth to a daughter, born with tiny, perfect palms that looked completely ordinary. They named her Hope, a name that was both a prayer and a declaration of their journey. The preacher, now a gentleman who had learned true humility, performed the baptism with trembling hands. He confessed privately to Alara that she had saved not only bodies, but his soul from hatred. She forgave him with a simple touch to his cheek, and he felt the last of his bitterness dissolve. Elias watched this exchange and felt a profound gratitude that swelled in his chest like a sunrise. Hope grew up learning both the ranching ways and the ancient healing arts of her mother. The scarred palms became a symbol, not of witchcraft, but of the power of surviving one's own pain. Alara's voice never fully returned, but she spoke in other ways, through tinctures, touches, and tender glances. Elias's hair turned silver, but his eyes retained that storm-gray intensity that first captivated her. They weathered droughts, cattle diseases, and the occasional lingering suspicion from strangers who passed through. But their anchor was the unwavering knowledge that they had faced the worst of humanity and found the best. One evening, sitting on the porch, they watched Hope ride out to check on a neighbor's sick foal. Alara rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, clearly this time, "Thank you for seeing me." He replied that she had seen him first into the hollow grief where his soul had once been. They sat in silence, the prairie wind carrying the scent of sage and the distant, contented lowing of cattle. The branding iron was a rusted, forgotten relic buried somewhere, but the lesson was etched into the town's bones. True healing, they learned, always requires the courage to unlearn fear and embrace the unknown with love. Elias still kept the slate she had used, framed in the clinic, a testament to silent beginnings. Patients would read it and understand that the most powerful words are often those written in desperate faith. Their story became a legend, passed down through generations, about the witch and the cowboy who saved them all. It was told that her scarred hands could still be felt in the breeze that cooled a fevered brow, and his steadfast protection could be heard in the thunder that promised rain over the grateful golden fields. Alara and Elias lived long, their bones finally resting side by side under a joint stone carved with wildflowers. The clinic continues, run by Hope and her own daughters, a lineage of healers born from a branding iron's shadow. No one in that valley ever again raised a hand in fear against the mysterious gift of another's survival. The prairie remembers, and if you listen, you can hear the whisper of scarred palms mending the world. This is the story of how love branded a heart more permanently than any iron ever could. And it is a reminder that the people we fear often hold the very cure we desperately need. Thank you for witnessing this tale of healing, courage, and a love that defied the flames of ignorance. Please subscribe to Western Tales Official right now and join our family of frontier dreamers and believers. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us if this story touched your own heart today. Like and share this video so that the legend of the healing hands continues to spread across the land. Every scar tells a story, and every story has the power to heal someone who is listening. From the dusty streets of fear to the quiet ranch of redemption, love always finds a way. Now go look at your own hands and recognize the incredible healing power you carry within them. The world needs your unique touch, so never let anyone brand your spirit with their frightened ignorance. Goodbye for now, and may your own story be filled with the kind of structural love that never breaks.